This video is going to be looking at assembly in Fusion 360 and specifically looking at activity 213, putting it all together in the IED curriculum. So one of the things that we will be taking a look at is adding or having parts inside of an assembly for Fusion 360, and then also how to apply joints to assemble those parts. I'm going to go ahead, I've already loaded the files into my data panel, so I'm going to go ahead and open up this file to work from. A few things to look at as I close the data panel. We have a few components here, so you can tell within these parts, if you were to activate each component, the other ones go grayed out, and you could modify each one of these components. So this is very essential to our part. When we're going back to the main assembly file, we want to activate the top level of the file, so that way all the parts are able to be moved. A few things here. We have the shoe top. So if you select a part, you'll see it'll underline there in the browser. You have the shoe bottom. You have the shoe itself. You have the stick adapter. You have two parts here, the shoe holder bottom, and then there's a shoe holder or phone holder top, excuse me. And then we end up having the stick top and then the stick bottom. So some things we can do here is for right now, some of the parts that we don't necessarily need, the top and the bottom. So we can go over here and hide these from our browser and our stick top in there. So that way we just have the 4 items. And then when you click on your home button, we'll go through and just kind of focus on these so far. All right, so as you take a look, the different parts that we will end up to work from, we're going to need to ground one of these parts. So when you talk about degrees of freedom for within a part, is that each part, and this can probably be described best by moving one of the components here. So here, my selection, so when I click, this is going through, so this right here perfectly demonstrates the degrees of freedom. I'm able to move this part along this axis, so along the z-axis here. I'm going to move it along the x-axis and as well as the y-axis. So there's 3 degrees of freedom. The other 3 that comes from is I'm able to rotate around the x-axis. I'm able to rotate about the y-axis, and I'm able to rotate about the z-axis. So as we take a look at that. So those are the kinds of things that we end up having. I'm going to hit cancel, so that way it puts that part back in the original position. But what we're doing is systematically removing those degrees of freedom to get desired motion that we want. So the thing we're going to choose, we probably want to choose a part like the shoe top, and I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to choose ground. So that will ground. A little pin icon will show there, and if I click and drag this, I can move and drag this part around, but I can't do this one. I can do the same thing here. So we need at least one part grounded to make sure that we're able to have these parts kind of going. All right, to start the assembly, so I'm going to go up here, I'm going to go to joint. So joint, you may go through and get a little pop-up window that looks like this. It says to capture the position or continue in the previous position. Typically you'll want to say capture the new position, otherwise it's going to return you back to the previous position, reverts back to the parts being in the position before you click that option. Okay, one thing we want to do is we got component 1, component 2 in our joint alignment, and then here in the tabs we want to choose what kind of motion that we want. So we've got rigid, we've got our revolute, we've got our slider, we've got cylindrical, we've got our planar. We end up having ball and a couple other different ones here. We're going to stick with rigid, and what we do here in position, our component, the component that moves, you'll notice that the shoe top grayed out, and that's because that is the non-moving part. So anytime you click the first component, that's the part that's going to be moving to meet that other part. So here I'm going to go ahead, it's going to be you can have a few different modes. You can choose by a joint origin, you can choose between 2 faces, or between 2 reference edges. So typically we're going to be working with joint origins. And what joint origins are is, you'll notice when you hover over a part, you'll get the little joint symbol, which is also up here, joint origin. You can also create new joint origins if there's ones that you don't like, but Fusion kind of automatically does that. So you'll see along the cylinder, it's provided, as I hover over it, it usually provides 3 different ones. It provides one on each end, So counting for 2, and then there's 1 directly in the middle, so between the 2 joint origins. Now what we're going to want here is you can also choose different edges, and you'll notice there's a joint that shows up right in the middle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose this circle right here, and you'll notice this grays out and it picks up the joint origin. I'm going to move over to my shoe top, and I'm going to do the exact same selection. Now the thing is, this is a rigid, so it does this kind of shaking motion, and what we're going to do here is we're allowed to make some adjustments if we want to offset in any direction, or we want to set it at a specific angle. There's also an option to flip, which is what we're going to do here. So there's your kind of the shoe being put in there in the appropriate orientation. I'm going to go ahead and say OK. So now you'll see there's a little icon here. This is the joint. Joints can be edited, so you can either double click on or you can right click and say edit joint. There's also now, once you apply some joints, there's a joints folder, and you'll see there's a slider which was between the phone holder bottom and top, which we may edit in here in a little bit, but we'll go through and take a look at some of those, and then maybe in another video we'll look at editing the joints and joint limits for these. Okay, so all the joints get collected in this folder in the browser. You can also do it by the icons. If, as you're working and you get a lot of these icons start to pop up, you can always go through and go down here to Object Visibility, and you can always uncheck joints for that. You don't really want to uncheck joint origins because then they won't show up on your parts, but you do want to go through and have the joints there for you. All right, so some other components that we want to take a look at as we're looking at this part is we're going to want to put this shoe bottom, so up here. And one thing I like to do is I'm going to go ahead and kind of drag this over to where the position is, and I like to use the move copy command, and I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to rotate it because this is the position that it's going to go to. So I'm going to go a negative 180 degrees, and I'm going to say OK, and this part is going to be up against there like this. So I kind of like to get my parts in the relative position and placement, because then there's just not so much confusion with the flipping and everything of the different components that as you do that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and turn this around so that way I can see this face. I'm going to run joint, capture the position because I've moved some parts, and here I'm going to stick with my rigid, and I'm going to go ahead and go with component 1. So one thing that I'll do is, if you're not getting the joint origins, make sure you do the select on the snap, and I'm going to try to choose a component. So like here, I know that the corner of where the point of tangency is on these rounds are going to be what we want. So now as you're kind of hovering over these, you can also, if you have trouble, like it keeps wanting to try to give a lot of options, hold the shift key, and that'll kind of help stabilize that point. So I'm going to pick that point right there on the tangency. I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to pick that same point, so then that way they lock in together, and that way they're going to be touching, and there we have our little component. So, and that's to make sure if we would have done the faces, this part would kind of be embedded in the other, and I didn't want that to happen. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK, and now you can kind of take a look using the view cube or using the free orbit. You can kind of see there's a little bit of a gap in there, which is kind of the way it's supposed to do, so that way you can loosen that, and then you can also tighten it when you get it in the right position that you wish. Alright, so from here, now I'm going to take a look at taking the stick adapter, and I'm going to go ahead and apply what we're working with here. And I'm going to go ahead and click on joint, capture the position. I'm going to go to motion. This time, this part we're going to want to attach, and we want it to be able to rotate. So that would be a revolute joint. And I'm going to choose position, and I'm going to choose the snap. Now, the thing that I would like to do is on the inside of this shape, again, right on the hole where we want it to line up, we can click. That establishes the joint origin, and I'm going to find the corresponding placement for this particular part. So, and there's where we're going to get our revolute joint happening there. I'm going to go ahead and say OK. So you're going to see that really at this point, Fusion doesn't have a concept of kind of these bodies intersecting each other or colliding with each other. So there's some things that we'll do later within this part to kind of make that happen. So again, if you double click on these, let's put this in the 0 position. So that would be what this one looks like if you don't necessarily like that. here's what 90 looks like. I can hit 90 and hit enter. That's probably kind of where I want it to be. So there's where we're at so far. In the curriculum, they want you to go through and to add a custom hardware, or a very, not really custom hardware, but a typical hardware fastener that would be able to go through and to hold in this hole and hold these two pieces together. So the way you're going to do that is go up to Insert, and you're going to go to Insert McMaster-Carr Component. And within this, in the curriculum, they give you a number that corresponds to the product that we're looking for. So what we're looking for here is a plastic head thumb screw, 2-arm, 10-32 thread, 1 inch long, and so there it's already picked out what it has. So there's the number. There's a lot of different ones of this same type that are different sizes, different threads, things of that nature. But you'll notice here product detail, and it has CAD there. So if you click on it, there's the preview of the part that you're going to be loading in. And if you scroll down, they'll show you a technical drawing of what that looks like. So it looks very similar, has a McMaster-Carr title block. And then you scroll down, you're going to choose the 3D step folder. So typically they'll go through and put in a SolidWorks folder, or a SolidWorks component. But here we want 3D step. We'll click save. And then what it's going to do is it's going to bring us into, it's going to bring that component. It may take a second to load, but bring that into our assembly. Usually what I like to do is kind of, bring that component over. And again, I like to get it in about the relative position that it should be for where we're going to assemble it. So I'm just using the move option to do that. And I'm going to go ahead and say, and here I can also choose to capture the position and say OK. All right, so as we take a look, that's going to be kind of some of the stuff we'll do. This one here, I'm going to show you a little different joint limit. You could do this with a few different options. Depends on what you're kind of going for, but I want to show you using a new type of motion. So this one's going to be called cylindrical. And cylindrical does not only it's a combination of a slider and a revolute joint, so almost like a screw. So I'm going to choose the position on this part. I'm going to choose the circle right up against the bottom of the head of this wing nut that's put onto this particular fastener, and then I'm going to choose the outside ring of the circle. So here's what you're going to see is the animated motion is you're going to get this spinning motion and a sliding motion back and forth. So then that way that develops that cylindrical motion as such. I'm going to go ahead and say OK. So right now we will edit some of those joint limits and everything later to get some realistic motion. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and let's bring back our phone holder top and bottom. And right now I'm going to do this little scenario. I'm going to move copy. We're going to do the components, and I'm going to go through, and then to select, I'm going to highlight both of these because there is a joint with them. I am going to spin this so then that way it's in a negative 90-degree angle, and we'll capture the position. And as well, let's go ahead and let's kind of bring this over using my little grips here, get it kind of close to where I'm going to assemble it. I'm going to say OK. And from here I'm going to put in find my joint option, and this one here is going to be a rigid joint that will be for component 1. Again, the same kind of hole there. I'm going to spin this around, choose the corresponding hole, and that's going to go through and put that into place, and I'm going to say OK. The top is going to go with there because there's also a joint. So here's the joint. This was previously in the file before we got started, and then later we'll look if we need to edit that at all or anything as such. Okay, the next thing is let's bring in the stick top and stick bottom, and here I can kind of drag these in. Here is the as we take a look at the stick top, and same kind of scenario, we're going to use joint, capture the position, rigid joint, and select the snap. So here we want to go right below where the threads are, right up against to the non-threaded part for the handle, and I'm going to choose the hole there. Now I may need to flip it, and that way that puts that together. And I'm going to go ahead and say OK. The next one here is I'm going to take a look at same kind of scenario. I'm going to do joint. This time though, we've got this little, the bottom is like a slider handle that allows you to extend to get a greater height. So I'm going to use a slider constraint, and here's the hole to where it kind of fits on there. So let me go ahead and choose that origin there. And then what I would do is, rather than choosing the end, I would in the kind of the rest position, or when it's collapsed down, I'm going to choose that position on my particular one, and I may have to do a flip option as well to kind of make that happen. And I'm going to say OK. All right, as you can tell, there's a lot of joints kind of going on right here. So again, you can always, go to the object visibility, and you can always uncheck joints, and then that way you kind of see this a little bit. Now what I'm going to do here as well, before we kind of end out this video, and I'm going to end it very soon because I know it's getting a little long, but I'm going to go ahead and put this kind of in this kind of position here. So one thing we can do is, because this is kind of like the natural position I think you would have the selfie stick in, and then I'm going to hit the little drop down arrow next to the view cube and say set current view as home, and I'm going to click fit to view, and then I'm going to click on the face here to look at it like from the front, and I'll say set current view as front. And then now your view cube will go through, here's the top, here's the front, and here's the right side. And I think it's going to be a little bit more intuitive, as you think about holding this in your hand and kind of using it, it's already in that position for you as it's kind of working. But all right, so this will assemble the selfie stick. In the next video, I'm going to cover joint limits and editing some of those to get some realistic motion for this particular